Have you ever found yourself trapped in a vicious, maddening cycle, a psychological labyrinth of your own making? Have you ever, with the purest of intentions and the most formidable application of willpower, set out to fix a flaw, solve a problem, or improve your life only to find that your very efforts seem to conspire against you, leaving you more entangled, more frustrated, and in a far worse state than when you began? You are intimately familiar with this cruel paradox. You try with all your might to be happy, only to become acutely aware of your own misery. You strive to be a good, virtuous person, and in doing so, you unearth a nest of resentful, ugly thoughts you never knew you had. You use the full force of your intellect to engineer a perfect, rational plan for your life, and watch in horror as it's torn to shreds by the chaotic, irrational, and utterly unpredictable forces of your own nature. This is the agonizing feedback loop that Fyodor Dostoevsky, the great Russian novelist and psychologist of the soul, so masterfully and relentlessly explored. In his dark, feverish, and profoundly human novels, he exposes a terrifying and liberating truth that for the deepest problems of the human spirit, the harder you try, the worse it gets. This is not a philosophy of lazy resignation or apathy. It is not an excuse to wallow in despair. It is a profound critique of the arrogant, self-deifying power of the modern ego and the intellect. It is a journey into the underground of the human psyche, a place where logic shatters against the raw power of the irrational, and where the path to salvation is not one of heroic striving, but of a brutal, humiliating, and ultimately grace-filled surrender. To engage with Dostoevsky is to allow his words to hold up a mirror to the most hidden and contradictory parts of your own being. It is to confront the terrifying possibility that your most cherished tool, your conscious, rational mind, is not only inadequate for the task of self-transformation, but is often the very source of your deepest suffering. This journey will take us from the glittering, soulless promise of the modern world's crystal palace into the spiteful, paradoxical mind of the underground man, and through the bloody, intellectual hell of Raskolnikov. It is a journey that seeks not to provide you with a new system for self-improvement, but to dismantle the entire project of self-improvement as you know it, inviting you instead into a more profound, more terrifying, and ultimately more human way of being. Part 1. The sickness of modernity, the cult of will, and the crystal palace. You live in a world that worships at the altar of the will. From the moment of your birth, you are indoctrinated into the cult of effort. You are taught, implicitly and explicitly, that there is no problem that cannot be solved by a combination of rational thought, strategic planning, and sheer grit-your-teeth determination. Your culture is a grand utopian project, built on the Enlightenment belief that humanity, guided by the light of science and reason, can perfect itself, eradicate suffering, and create a perfectly harmonious society. Dostoevsky gave this utopian dream a name: the Crystal Palace. It is a symbol of a world perfected by logic, a glittering architectural marvel where every human action is predictable, every need is met, and every problem is solved by a simple, rational calculation of self-interest. There is no chaos, no mystery, no suffering, no divine spark. It is, in theory, paradise. In reality, it is a perfectly constructed, perfectly transparent anthill. And you, as a product of this age, have internalized this project. You have turned your own life into a miniature crystal palace. You see your anxieties, your insecurities, your dark thoughts, and your self-destructive habits as bugs in the system, glitches in your personal software that must be identified, isolated, and eliminated through conscious effort. The self-help industry, a multi-billion-dollar testament to this belief, provides you with an endless supply of tools for this project. You are told you can hack your brain, engineer your happiness, manifest your destiny, and optimize your existence. You create intricate systems of self-improvement. You journal, you meditate, with the goal of controlling your thoughts. You set smart goals. You practice positive affirmations. You declare war on your own perceived flaws. You are, in essence, trying to become the perfect, rational, self-interested being, the man of science and truth, that the utopian thinkers of Dostoevsky's time believed would be the pinnacle of human evolution. You are trying to build your own private crystal palace, a fortress of the mind where nothing can hurt you, where every emotion is managed, and where you are the sole, rational architect of your own reality. This relentless project of self-engineering creates a profound internal split. You cultivate a public self, an optimized persona designed for success and approval, while your private, authentic self, with all its chaos, contradictions, and messy desires, is pushed further and further into the shadows. This optimized self is a carefully curated collection of acceptable traits, a mask of competence and control. The more you identify with this mask, the more terrifying the unmanaged, spontaneous parts of your true nature become. The religion of reason promises you absolute control, but it delivers a new and more insidious form of slavery. You become a slave to your own internal critic, to the impossible standards of the perfect self you are trying to construct. Every spontaneous feeling, every unproductive impulse, every moment of weakness is seen as a betrayal of the project, a crack in the crystal walls. And yet you fail. The anxiety you tried to crush with logic returns, often stronger than before, disguised as a new and more insidious obsession. The self-destructive habit you tried to crush with willpower rears its head in a new and more monstrous form, perhaps as a different addiction or a cynical apathy. The more you try to impose a perfect logical order on the chaos of your inner world, the more chaotic and disordered it becomes. You feel a profound, gnawing sense of shame and failure, believing the fault lies in your lack of effort, your insufficient willpower, your flawed execution of the plan. You tell yourself, if only I tried harder, was more disciplined, had a better system. But Dostoevsky would look upon your strenuous efforts with a kind of sorrowful, knowing pity. He would tell you that the fault lies not in the effort, but in the very premise of the project itself. You are trying to solve a problem of the soul with the clumsy, inadequate tools of the ego and the intellect. You are trying to cage a wild and ancient force with the flimsy bars of reason. And that, he would say, is a recipe for spiritual catastrophe. Your very attempt to create a perfect, rational, painless self is the source of your deepest pain. You are at war with the most fundamental, most vital part of your own nature, and in that war, the harder you fight, the more you wound yourself. The crystal palace you are so desperately trying to build is not a sanctuary, it is your prison. Part 2. The voice from the underground, the rebellion of the irrational. To truly understand this catastrophic failure of the will, we must descend. We must leave the clean, well-lit corridors of the conscious mind and go down into the squalor, the darkness, and the intellectual torment of Dostoevsky's notes from underground. The anonymous narrator of this novella, The Underground Man, is the perfect embodiment of the modern paradox. He is not an ignorant brute. On the contrary, he is a man of profound, almost painful intelligence and acute self-awareness. He is hyper-conscious. He has read all the books. He understands all the theories of rational self-interest. He knows precisely what would be good for him, what would lead to a healthy, prosperous, and respectable life. He understands, for example, the mathematical certainty that 2 + 2 = 4, and that to act against this logical truth is, by any reasonable standard, absurd. And yet he finds himself, time and again, irresistibly compelled to act against his own best interests. He is spiteful when it would be advantageous to be kind. He is self-sabotaging when success is within his grasp. He offends those who try to help him and wallows in his own humiliation. He clings to his suffering, his liver ailment, his toothache, his misery, as a badge of honor, a testament to his own unique identity. He tells us he can't even manage to become an insect. So riddled is he with a consciousness that prevents him from simply being. He is trapped in a paralysis of analysis, thinking every impulse to death before it can become an action, and then despising himself for his inaction. Why? Why does he act this way? The modern self-help guru would diagnose him with self-sabotage, a lack of self-esteem, or a negative mindset, and prescribe a course of cognitive behavioral therapy. But Dostoevsky's diagnosis is far more radical. The underground man acts this way because he is human. He acts this way to rebel against the suffocating tyranny of the Crystal Palace. As he famously declares, what a man wants above all else is not what is profitable or rational, but his own most advantageous advantage, his free, capricious, and often utterly irrational will. This most advantageous advantage is the assertion of the soul against the system. It is the desire to prove that one is a unique, unpredictable human being, not a cog in a machine, not a piano key to be played upon by the laws of nature and reason. He will choose to believe that 2 + 2 = 5 simply to assert his freedom. This is not about being bad at math. It is a profound metaphysical rebellion. 2 + 2 = 4 represents a deterministic universe, a world of cold, hard facts where there is no room for human freedom. It is the formula of the prison. To insist that 2 + 2 = 5 is a beautiful thing is to insist that there is something in the human spirit that transcends logic, something that cannot be calculated or predicted. It is the cry of a soul suffocating under the weight of certainty. The Crystal Palace, with its promise of a painless, rational existence, is also a prison because it denies the very thing that makes life meaningful, the freedom to choose, even the freedom to choose suffering. The underground man is a terrifying prophecy. He is what happens when the human soul, with all its wild, chaotic, sacred, and sometimes perverse irrationality, is squeezed into the narrow, airless box of pure reason. He shows us that within every one of us, there is a wild, untamable desire that rebels against our own well-laid plans. You have felt this. Your own inexplicable acts of self-sabotage. The sudden impulse to ruin a good relationship just when it becomes stable, to procrastinate on the vital project that could bring you success, to say the one thing in an argument that will cause the most irreparable damage, are the whispers of your own underground man. It is the part of you that refuses to be a predictable, optimized machine. The harder you try to live a life of pure, calculated rationality, the louder and more insistent that rebellious, irrational voice becomes. The underground man clings to his suffering because in a world that wants to eliminate suffering, it is the last bastion of his humanity. It is the one thing that is truly his, the one thing that cannot be rationalized away by the utopian planners. Your own anxieties and neuroses, which you try so hard to eradicate, may be, from this perspective, the last stand of your own soul against the tyranny of your own well-meaning ego. The underground man is the shadow cast by the bright, blinding light of your rational self-improvement project. And the more you try to banish that shadow, the larger and darker it grows, until it consumes everything. Part 3. The Grand Experiment of the Ego, Raskolnikov's Bloody Utopia. If the underground man represents the philosophical paralysis that comes from this internal war, then the protagonist of Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov, represents that philosophy taken to its horrifying, logical conclusion. He is the underground man who dares to leave the basement. He is a brilliant, handsome, but impoverished student who, in the crucible of his own intellectual pride and isolation, develops a theory that is the ultimate expression of the ego's desire for godhood. His cramped, coffin-like room is a metaphor for his mind, a space where a single toxic idea can be cultivated without the correcting influence of fresh air or human connection. His theory is a seductive piece of intellectual poison. He divides the world into two categories: ordinary people, the masses who must live in obedience to the law and serve only to reproduce the species, and extraordinary men, the Newtons, the Lycurguses, the Napoleons of the world, who have an inner right to transgress, to step over blood and legal or moral boundaries, for the sake of a higher purpose, for the birth of a new idea that will benefit humanity. The extraordinary man is a law unto himself. Believing himself, of course, to be one of the extraordinary, he decides to prove his theory, to assert his will over the petty constraints of conventional morality by murdering a cruel, parasitic old pawnbroker. This is the ultimate act of rational egoism. He constructs a flawless intellectual justification for it, a perfect moral calculus. The old woman is a louse preying on the unfortunate. Her life has a negative value. Her death is a net positive for the world. He will use her money to complete his studies, rescue his sister from a loveless marriage, and eventually do great things for humanity. He convinces himself it is an almost altruistic act, but this is a thin, intellectual veneer over the true, terrifying motive. He wants to prove, through this single monumental act of will, that he is not a trembling creature, not an ordinary louse, but a superman, a self-created god who can make his own laws. The murder, he believes, will be a triumphant act of self-liberation, the final bloody proof of his own superiority. It is his personal Crystal Palace project, engineered with the cold logic of a mathematician. And what happens? The moment the axe falls, or rather the moment he brings it down, his grand theory collapses into a nightmare of psychological and spiritual torment. His intellect, the very tool that engineered the crime, is utterly powerless to save him from the consequences that erupt, not from the outside world, but from the depths of his own soul. The crime itself is a clumsy, chaotic, bloody mess, not the clean philosophical execution he had imagined. He is immediately overcome by a feverish delirium. He is not pursued by the police so much as he is hunted by his own conscience, by the irrational, irrepressible forces of guilt, paranoia, and a profound, sickening sense of alienation from the human community. He faints at the police station when hearing talk of the murder. He feels an unbridgeable chasm, a pair of scissors, as he says, that has cut him off from everyone he loves. When he tries to connect with his friend Razumikin or his family, their love and concern feel like a physical torment, a reminder of the world of human warmth he has irrevocably left behind. He tries, again and again, to apply the tool that got him into this mess, his intellect. He tries to rationalize his actions, to reassert his intellectual superiority, to outsmart the clever detective Porfiry Petrovich, to convince himself that he was right and that his only failure was his own weakness in the aftermath. But every effort only tightens the noose. The harder he tries to be a Napoleon, the more he realizes he is a trembling, miserable insect. Raskolnikov's journey demonstrates Dostoevsky's central thesis with terrifying clarity. You cannot think or will your way to a higher state of being. The attempt to impose the ego's will upon the deep, ancient laws of the human soul, laws of empathy, community, and conscience, leads not to freedom, but to a hell of isolation and self-destruction. The will, when it deifies itself, becomes a demonic force, and the intellect becomes its willing and ultimately impotent servant. Part 4. The Path Downward. Surrender, Suffering, and Grace. So if striving, reason, and willpower are not the answer, if in fact they are the very source of the problem, what is? Is the only alternative a life of passive despair, a permanent residence in the underground? Dostoevsky's novels are not just diagnoses of a spiritual sickness. They are profound, complex explorations of the path to healing. And that path, paradoxically, leads downward. It is a path not of heroic assertion, but of humble surrender. It is a path that requires not a stronger will, but a broken one. For Raskolnikov, the turning point comes only when his intellectual pride is completely shattered. It comes when he abandons his theories, when all his rationalizations have failed him, and he falls at the feet of the gentle, long-suffering prostitute Sonia. She, who has been forced by life into degradation, has maintained a core of profound faith and humility that he, in his pride, has lost. His healing begins not with an act of strength, but with an act of profound weakness and vulnerability. He confesses his crime. It is in the acceptance of his own guilt, his own lousiness, his own ordinary, trembling humanity that he takes the first tentative step back towards the human family. Sonia's wisdom is crucial. She does not offer him a rational argument or a better theory. She does not try to fix him. She weeps with him, she embraces him, and she points him toward a path of expiation that is ritualistic and non-rational. She tells him to go to the crossroads, a place of decision and public gathering, bow down, kiss the earth he has defiled, and confess his sin to all the people. She offers him not an idea, but an act of profound surrender, an act that will humiliate his ego and reconnect his body and soul to the earth and the community. She offers him not a new way of thinking, but a new way of being. In the Siberian prison camp, Raskolnikov finally begins his true rebirth. It does not happen through developing a new, better philosophy in his mind. In fact, Dostoevsky tells us that Raskolnikov is still confused by his crime, intellectually. The transformation happens on a deeper level. It happens through simple, non-rational experiences, a powerful dream of a world destroyed by a plague of intellectual pride, where everyone believes they alone possess the truth, and the dawning of a simple, unanalyzed love for Sonia. It is only when he stops trying to figure it all out, when he stops judging and analyzing himself and others, and simply responds with love, that the dialectic is replaced by life. He has to let his old, arrogant, intellectual self die in order to be reborn. He has to stop trying to be extraordinary and simply be human. This is the recurring theme throughout Dostoevsky's work. It is the wisdom of Father Zosima in The Brothers Karamazov, who teaches that the path to God is not through intellectual theology or heroic asceticism, but through active love, through immersing oneself in the messy, irrational, and often painful reality of other people's lives. Active love is not a grand, abstract idea of loving humanity. It is the difficult, concrete, and often frustrating act of loving your neighbor. It is about small, humble acts of service that pull you out of the prison of your own mind and ground you in the shared reality of human existence. The harder you try paradigm is the ego's game. The ego wants to be the hero of its own story, the triumphant conqueror of its own flaws, the rational architect of its own salvation. Dostoevsky tells us that this is a false path, a path that leads only to the hell of the isolated self. The true hero's journey, in his world, is one of kenosis, of self-emptying. It is about accepting your powerlessness. It is about embracing your suffering not as a curse to be eliminated, but as a potential gateway to grace, a sacred fire that can burn away the illusions of the ego. It is about having the faith to surrender to a power greater than your own conscious mind, whether you call that power God, love, or the unconscious self. This is the ultimate paradox. True strength is found in the confession of weakness. True freedom is found in the surrender of control. True life is found on the other side of a necessary death of the ego. Ultimately, the profound and challenging philosophy of Dostoevsky leads us to a place beyond the simple binaries of success and failure, strength and weakness. It reveals that the frantic, effortful striving of the modern ego is a form of spiritual pride, a desperate attempt to deny our own creaturely limitations, our own profound dependence on forces beyond our control. The harder you try to be a god, the more you will suffer the torment of being a mere human. The path to a life of genuine depth, meaning, and a strange, paradoxical kind of freedom lies in the opposite direction. It lies in the courage to be imperfect, the humility to accept your own suffering, and the faith to believe that there is a wisdom in the soul that far surpasses the clever calculations of the mind. This is not a philosophy for the faint of heart. It demands that you abandon your most cherished illusions about your own power and control. It asks you to walk through the fire of your own inner hell, to embrace your own lousiness, to accept that you cannot save yourself. But on the other side of that surrender, Dostoevsky suggests, lies a state of grace. It is the peace that Raskolnikov glimpses in Siberia, the quiet joy that radiates from Father Zosima. It is the discovery that your own small, striving ego is not the center of the universe, and that in relinquishing its frantic grip, you are opened up to a love, a connection, and a meaning that you could never have engineered on your own. You stop trying to force the river to flow where you want it to go, and you learn at last to surrender to its powerful, mysterious current. And in that surrender, you are finally carried home.